It's just after dawn in the year 100 AD, and the city is already screaming. Iron-rimmed wheels grind over stone. A landlord is shouting. Somewhere below your window, a man is being whipped in the street, and nobody looks twice. This is Rome, the biggest city on earth, 1 million people stacked on top of each other, and you have to survive a full day in it. What you'd see before noon would follow you for the rest of your life. So what did a single day in ancient Rome actually look like? Let's start where every Roman day began. Waking up. But you're not waking up in marble. You're on the 6th floor of an apartment block called an insula. In a rented room, barely big enough to lie down in. There's no kitchen. An open flame this high up could burn the whole building down, and it often did. There's no bathroom, there's no running water. That stops 3 floors below you. The poet Juvenal, who lived in this city, said people like you lived in a town propped up on slender sticks. The landlord papering over each new crack and telling you to sleep soundly while the whole thing leaned out over your head. The higher up you lived, the poorer you were and the farther you'd fall when it came down. And every morning, before the sun was even up, you had a job to do. Not a job that paid you, a job that kept you alive. Because you are a client. In Rome, almost everyone who wasn't rich was tied to someone who was. So every morning you joined a crowd of men in their best clothes, climbing down into the dark streets to walk to the house of your patron, a wealthier man whose front door was your entire economy. You stood in line, you waited, and when they finally let you in, you greeted him, called him master, and held out your hand for the sportula. A small handout of food or a few coins, that was the whole transaction. Do it every day, and you ate. Miss it, and you didn't. Some men did this their entire lives and never rose an inch. The poet Martial, who lived it, complained that the morning walk to beg for scraps wore out more in shoe leather than the scraps were worth. But you went anyway, everyone went. Because in Rome, who you knew wasn't part of survival. It was survival. Then you stepped into the streets, and this is where Rome tried to kill you. The roads were canyons, a few feet wide, buildings leaning in overhead until they nearly touched. No streetlights, no addresses, no police. Carts had been banned in daylight, so the street was a solid wall of bodies, vendors, porters, soldiers, animals, funerals, all crushed into the same stone channel. Juvenal described being pinned in that crowd, an elbow in his ribs, a beam swinging at his skull, a soldier's hobnailed boot splitting his toes. And from the windows above, the same windows you slept behind, people emptied their chamber pots into the street below. Getting hit was so common that Rome had actual laws deciding who paid when the contents of a window landed on your head. And here's something strange about that day you're surviving. The Romans split daylight into 12 hours, sunrise to sunset, no matter the season. So a summer hour swelled to 75 minutes. And a winter hour shrank to 45. The hour itself breathed with the year. You didn't live by a clock, you lived by the light. By midday, you're hungry, and you still can't cook. So you eat the way the city ate, standing up at a hole in the wall called a thermopolium, the ancient world's fast food, a bowl of porridge, bread, olives, and poured over almost all of it, a sauce called garum, fish guts left to rot and ferment in the sun for months, until they collapsed into a salty brown liquid. To you, it would smell like something died. To a Roman, it was on every table, rich and poor alike. Then, in the afternoon, the whole city did the same thing at the same time. It went to bathe. The baths weren't really about getting clean. For the smallest coin in your pocket, almost free, you got hot rooms and cold pools, exercise yards, food, gossip, deals and bodies everywhere, senators beside slaves, all of it naked, all of it loud. This was the living room of a city whose homes had no living rooms. It was where Rome actually happened. But there's one more thing a Roman did with their day, and it's the part we've spent 2,000 years trying not to look at directly. The games. We remember the gladiators, the armour, the roar of the Colosseum, 50,000 people screaming for blood. That part is real. But the games ran all day, and the middle of the day belonged to something else. The morning was wild animal hunts. The afternoon was the famous duels. And at lunchtime, in between, when most of the crowd drifted off to eat, they brought out the condemned, criminals, prisoners of war, the enslaved, and killed them in the arena as filler, unarmed, one after another. The philosopher Seneca went one afternoon expecting light entertainment. He left sick. He wrote that in the morning men were thrown to the lions, and in the afternoon to the spectators, and that the crowd's only complaint was that the dying didn't last long enough. This wasn't hidden. This wasn't the dark edge of Roman life. This was the middle of an ordinary day, watched by ordinary people on their lunch break. And it was free, because someone powerful had paid for it, to keep you fed and watching and grateful. Because none of it ran on its own. The bread you ate, the baths you sat in, the city you walked through, all of it stood on people who were owned. As many as 1 in 3 human beings in Rome belonged to someone else. They carried the water, cooked the food, raised the children, and died at noon to fill the quiet hours. And a poet named Juvenal watched his city hand over its freedom for comfort, and gave the trade a name that still cuts. Bread and circuses. Feed people enough and entertain them enough, he said, and they'll give you everything else without a fight. And this is the part that should make you uncomfortable, because bread and circuses was not a Roman flaw. It was a discovery. They found the exact lever that quiets a human being, and we have never stopped pulling it. You didn't line up at a patron's door this morning, but you checked who replied, who liked, who noticed you, and it landed in the same place. You don't watch men die at lunch, but you scroll a feed engineered to hand you outrage and spectacle in an intermission that never ends. You have your bread, you have your circuses. The Romans just didn't have a word for the screen. Every instinct that ran that city, the hunger for status, the pull of the crowd, the relief of being given just enough, is still running in you right now. You think you've been watching them. You've been looking in a mirror. For most of human history, Rome was the largest thing people had ever built. 1 million human beings packed closer than humans had ever lived, inventing the apartment, the shopping street, the celebrity, the morning commute, and the slow art of looking away. They woke in cramped rooms. They begged for scraps. They ate rot off the street and watched strangers die to fill the empty afternoon. And then they went home and did it again the next day and the next for 500 years. We tell ourselves we are nothing like them. Taller buildings, cleaner water, kinder laws, but the day they lived is hiding inside the day you live, almost beat for beat. Rome never really fell. It just learned your name and waited for you to wake up inside it.